Good afternoon. So before I actually talk about Compass Group, just a little introduction about myself. My name is Imran. I'm the Group CTO of Compass Group. I've been working with Compass for the last 3 years, since 2014. Before that, I spent almost 20 years in the financial services industry, working across AXA, which is a French insurance group. Before that, I was working with American Express. So I joined Compass back in 2014, and that's when we started our journey here. So let's start by giving you a little bit of introduction about Compass Group, who we are, what we do. As Fernando mentioned, we are basically in the food services business. The numbers that we have here is really the 2016 numbers. The 2017 results were recently announced. We are a 22.9 billion pound business. We have over 500,000 employees worldwide. We operate out of 50 countries. We have what we call 50,000 client locations that we work out of. And overall, we serve about 5 billion meals in a year, so fairly large in terms of our operations. If you look at from a business perspective, I would say we are split basically into 3 regions. We have the North American business, we have Europe, and then the rest of the world. Rest of the world is around Asia, Middle East, and Latin America. In terms of our sectors, we operate across multiple sectors, whether it's in the business and industries, and typically, I would say we feed most of the Silicon Valley companies. Amazon is one of our customers, Microsoft, Dell, IBM, all the companies, we provide services to them. And we provide this through a host of brands. Compass per se is what I call a house of brands. We have a number of brands under which we operate and provide services to. And we provide services, as I said, to the business and industry sector. We are quite large in the education sector. We provide services in colleges, in universities, etc. We have a business which focuses on healthcare and the seniors. So we provide a lot of the hospitals that you have. We provide the food services there. We have a large sports and leisure business, and that runs under the Levy Restaurants business, which focuses on delivering services in the big stadiums that are out there. And then we have a large defense, offshore, and remote business, which is really focused on the oil and gas companies or looking at where you're doing working in remote parts of the world where you're looking at doing the minerals, etc., and all those activities. So that's about us from a business perspective. Now, before I go into what we have done on the SAP side, I'd like to spend some time just explaining to you the kind of challenge that we had from a business perspective. So, as I say, Compass Group, has operations across the group. And we are quite unique when you compare to other companies. I mean, the companies I worked for previously, which are financial services companies, you have a backbone network interconnecting all the countries. And Compass, for us, each of the countries is an island in itself. And we don't have a global network which interconnects those countries. So that becomes a challenge when you're trying to look at consolidating applications because you suddenly need to build a backbone network to interconnect them. As we are starting to look at delivering more regional global applications, we need to find a way that we can share those applications, but in a cost-effective way. If we were to go the traditional route of building our own data center, putting the application there, then we need to build MPLS links into those locations, and then you end up having significant costs through that approach. On top of it, IT security, cybersecurity is a top priority. And to my mind, moving to the cloud helps us in addressing some of those challenges. The reason I say it's helping us is really because as you start transforming from one model to the other, when you are going down that path, you're forced to think about security. And I think just working on our own individually from a security perspective, we're not as strong as we are when we partner with an organization like AWS. So for us, cloud, I saw as an opportunity to leverage that we can get scale, maturity, and reliability using the cloud provider, and we would be able to provide a cost-effective solution to the business. So That's why we went down the path of what I would call the cloud-first strategy. How did we do that? We didn't really start by taking the most complex, the most difficult workload and moving it to AWS first. But although you would argue the first platform that we moved was SAP, but having said that, we started in what I would call a low-risk migration approach. We looked at driving this from an opportunistic perspective, where we tried to leverage existing business needs that we had. In some countries, we did not have the adequate disaster recovery. So moving to the cloud provided us an opportunity to enable that. In other places, we were looking at doing a data refresh project. So again, rather than refreshing on-premise, we decided to move it to the cloud. We were developing new applications. So in that case, again, we can actually deploy directly into the cloud rather than going from a traditional route. And also try and leverage when a DC contract renewal is coming up so that we can actually time the migration to that time to ensure that we can get the right ROI from a perspective. So the approach that we followed was twofold. One is a lift and shift migration project where we took existing workloads and just put it onto the new platform. And the second migration was what I would call new applications. As we were developing the new applications, we just built them straight into the cloud. Now, when we started by driving this activity, but as we started to get more and more success down the path, we actually decided to go down what I would call a cloud-first strategy. From a cloud-first perspective, the decision was that by default, we will look at moving everything that's on-premise to the cloud. Each of the countries will build an individual roadmap to get to that path. But by default, I would say we would not look at why to move to the cloud, but we would say why do we need to remain on-premise and really drive towards that. Okay, so again, before I go into the what are we specifically doing on SAP on AWS, I just thought I'd give you a reflection of what we saw as some of the benefits that we gained by moving to AWS. Obviously, the first one is lower unit price. I think that's very clear. The benefits can be gained by moving to AWS. You get a lower unit rate when it comes to compute, when it comes to storage, etc. But there are a lot of other things that we could also gain by moving to AWS. The first one was disaster recovery. So from a disaster recovery perspective, a lot of countries did not have the right DR in place. And even if they did, it was much more local. You know, what they had was 2 data centers very close to each other. And by moving to an AWS kind of environment, it provided us the opportunity to move from what I would just call local DR capability to much more regional. So today we have our SAP instance for Japan hosted in Tokyo. The disaster recovery for that is hosted in Singapore. Even if we had a major calamity in Tokyo, we could still continue to operate. That kind of capability is very difficult to do in a traditional data center approach. On top of it, I think there are a lot of other cost optimization levers that we were able to discover. For some of our development environments, we were able to do the start-stop and pay per use so that we don't have to keep running our development environment 24 hours. You just run it for the hours that we require it. Capacity optimization, scaling the infrastructure up and down depending on what the business needs are, which is something different than what we would have traditionally done in the previous thing, where we were trying to really look at buying and building higher capacity infrastructure because you were looking at trying to build it for the maximum month-end kind of process. Agility, because we can then scale up, scale down, depending on what the requirements are. And then last but not least, from a reservation perspective, we could get significantly lower cost once we have looked at workloads like SAP, where we know what the capacity requirements are going to be. We are able to reserve those instances and get another 20-30% cost reduction by just moving from an on-demand to a reservation model. So overall, I would say the business benefits that we have gained have been quite large for us, and it's been quite positive from that perspective. So what have we done on SAP on AWS specifically? What we looked at was we started by saying we were looking at implementing a few regional platforms and these projects. So what we decided to do right at the beginning was we were evaluating whether to run it on-premise, whether we should run it in the cloud. And we took the decision back in 2014 to move it to the AWS. And for us, it was easier because it was a greenfield opportunity, not too much risk because it was something that we were just implementing. And then based on the success of having moved these workloads there, we then started by saying, let's move the on-premise environments that we have today to the cloud. Again, SAP is mission critical, so what we decided to do was we ran POCs for some of these more complex workloads before we did the migration, because obviously we didn't want to move something which was in full production just straight into production on the cloud. We decided to first run a proof of concept, test the whole application out, and then move it there. Okay, so what have we done? We started back in 2014. As I said, that's when we started on this journey. We went live with the first instance, which was actually for our India business. This was a regional implementation that we did, hosted out of Singapore. We implemented an SAP ECC6 system running on the HANA database, hosted out of Singapore. Based on the success of that project, we then were developing a new Latin American platform, which was Chile and Argentina. And again, we put this into the AWS cloud. And actually, we put it in the North America because we found the latency from North America to be better for us compared to having it hosted out of Brazil. So these were the two instances that we really started off on from an SAP perspective. And it was quite successful. The good news, at least on the India one, was it was a sort of standalone system. There were not too many legacy systems that needed to talk to it. So again, it was a bit of a low-risk project. As we started to get into Chile, Argentina, there were a few legacy systems that had to talk to it, and we were able to integrate it in. And based on the success of that, that gave us the confidence that we could move more and more workloads there. So interestingly, what we decided, at least from a Compass perspective, was we decided the first project that we did from a cloud perspective was to move SAP. Now, traditionally, most companies would pick up some other application and say, let's move this low-risk project and do it. But in the case of Compass, actually, it took the risk, and we implemented SAP first. And for me, it was providing two things. One was, if we could make SAP successful, it would be very difficult for anybody else to argue why some application cannot to the platform. The second thing is, if you move SAP, all the peripheral systems that go along with SAP will also move along with it onto AWS. So it was a bit of a, I would say, you could say a calculated risk, but I think when we had the conversation with AWS, and our confidence level was that we will be able to deliver on this. So starting with India, which was, as I said, a standalone system, much easier to do, learned from it, and then we did the Chile and Argentina as the next one. We obviously did not stop there. In 2016, we actually started the Brazilian migration. Brazil was hosted with IBM in the IBM data center in Sao Paulo. Having said that, we did not have adequate disaster recovery set up with it. So instead of actually going for a traditional disaster recovery with IBM locally, we decided to actually leave the production environment with IBM and actually put the DR platform into AWS. And that we decided to put it into, I think it was, again, in the US, because at that point of time, the Sao Paulo instance was not considered to be mature enough for a SAP environment for us. So once we got that going, the team got confident that it can work. In the last 1 year, we've actually now moved even the production from IBM into the AWS environment. So our Brazilian business is now fully both production and development environments are both in AWS. We then took Japan, which was the next country. Again, two reasons for it. One was disaster recovery. Second, there was a refresh program that had to be done. They were running on legacy hardware. So we looked at two options, either doing the upgrade locally in the data center that they were using or moving it to the cloud. We decided to actually move it to the cloud. And we did this project back in 2016. And actually, we built the production environment in Tokyo with a DR in Singapore. So again, with this one, at that point of time when we were setting this up, the legacy system that we had was running Oracle, SAP on Oracle, and it was not sort of certified by, by SAP to run on AWS at that point. So we actually did a migration, and we migrated from Oracle to SQL as part of this whole migration project. Again, 2017, we took on that was this year, we had an instance which is hosted in Dubai for us, which was supporting the EMEA Central Middle Eastern region, which supports about 8 countries for us. It was running SAP ECC6, and we decided to our Frankfurt AWS environment, and we have migrated this over, I think it was 3 to 4 months. It was a 4-month project for us to just move from there to into the EMEA, into AWS. And now we have got RTO, RPO, from an application perspective, and it's supporting 8 countries, including some of the exotic countries like Gabon, Kazakhstan. I mean, UAE is not exotic, but all those countries are getting managed from this particular environment for us now. The last one that we did was for our Compass UK business. The UK business is about a $2 billion bound business. Again, it's got about 60,000 employees, and they support about 7,000 clients in the UK. It's probably one of the largest SAP payroll instances for us. Not all the instances that I talked about, we do payroll processing within SAP. But in the UK, one of the critical processes that we do is really the payroll process for our 60,000 employees in the UK. And majority of the applications were running on on-premise servers. What we required was, because payroll is a very critical process, we needed to have much higher RTO, RPO requirements than what we had got on-premise. So what we decided was that we really need to look at redesigning it from a disaster recovery perspective. Also, what we had was that the performance of the application, because as the business had grown, we started to have performance issues during peak loads. And the option for us was really to upgrade the existing environment, build a disaster recovery, or actually move the whole instance into AWS. So as you can imagine, a very critical business load for us. So what we decided was, as part of the cloud-first strategy, we looked at building a business case. What would it cost to do it on-premise? What would it cost to do in the cloud? One of the critical things that I see for a cloud journey perspective is really getting the internal teams on board, because I think the guys are quite good in what they do, but to some extent, there is always a fear of the unknown, because they feel, oh, what is this going to be? How is it going to work? In the traditional days, everybody wanted a mainframe to be in their data center. Otherwise, they didn't have a data center, and they wanted that for themselves to be able to run it. So what we did with the help of AWS was organize some training sessions for the technical teams so that they understand the art of the possible in AWS. And as the teams understood what is possible in AWS, they were the guys who really became the change advocates. The technical teams who in the previous thing were saying it's not going to work, suddenly once they understand how it works in AWS, were able to do it. What we also decided to do early on was not just go straight into production, but undertake a proof of concept, which we did with one of the AWS partners, along with AWS and the internal IT team. And we also worked with your professional services team in AWS to see, before we go live, to make sure that everything is working. What have we achieved at the end of it? We have a fit-for-purpose disaster recovery plan. We have the ability to scale up and scale down. From a security platform perspective, we have been able to re-platform the environment to the recent operating systems. We have been able to implement more security by implementing network access control, et cetera, into the environment. So not only did we do this by, you could say, which can help us in lowering the cost compared to what it would have been on-premise, but we have in the process been able to improve on a number of areas. What are the lessons learned? I just have a couple of slides to go, and then we'll open it up for questions. Bottom line, from my perspective, SAP on AWS works. It's not something that needs to be proven. It does work. Having said that, I think there are a few challenges if you start to move workloads across. One of them is really the data transfer that you have from your on-premise into the cloud. It takes time. If you look at EMEA instance, when we were trying to move the data, it was virtually impossible because of the network capacity that we had to be able to do it. And what we ended up doing was copying the data onto a disk, flying somebody from UAE, from Abu Dhabi to India, because I have my team in India, and that team then uploaded it into S3 in India, and from there we were able to copy it into Europe. Or we could have actually flown the guy to Europe, but we decided to go the other way. But the problem is, obviously, it does take time. You need to have the capacity in your network to be able to do it. And what we should do is really do a migration method should be properly tested to ensure that you can complete it within the window that's available. Especially on SAP, you're going to say you will take the system down on a Friday evening or a Saturday, and it has to be up and running by Monday morning. You have 48 hours, which you need to copy the data, to test the applications, to do everything. And because of the speed of the links and the capacity that you have, you need to find the right way to be able to do that. In some cases, what we end up doing was copying a copy of the data was already copied, and then we were just doing the incremental changes were done during the change window to make sure that it works. You need to do some dry runs to ensure that you learn from them before you actually do the cutover, because the dry runs helps you in testing out what works, what doesn't work. As part of this process, we also try to identify all the peripheral systems that need to talk to SAP. And in some of the cases, we actually moved them along with SAP into the cloud to avoid having too much of latency between those systems. And last but not least, use an experienced partner. So we have been working with AWS to suggest who would be the right partner in the right country. We have used a number of partners across the different countries to help us in this journey. To some extent, it's also about making sure that the local country IT team is comfortable with the partner that we end up using. But it's critical that you select a partner who has done this before, who can help you in accelerating and not making the mistakes that other people have made. Last slide for me. What's the way ahead? We will continue to on our journey to the cloud. We are following two elements, what I would call a lift and shift. So today we have moved a number of our SAP instances. We have a number of other countries who are today still operating on-premise, not necessarily SAP, but other instances. We will look at moving those across. We are in the process of developing a new SAP platform for our European instance that we are going to go straight into the cloud. We are looking at what we do from a North America perspective because we're still not into the cloud. So the journey is not over for us. I think it has begun. And it's been begun successfully over the last couple of years, and we hope that we can continue down this journey as we go along. With that, I will pause and go and answer any questions that you have. Just to clarify, I'm not an SAP expert, but just to set the context on that. But if there is any specific questions that you have, I'll be happy to answer them. Well, North America for us is about 55% of our business. So again, we have to go through a risk-based approach. So today, we started with what I would call the lower risk instances for us, and then we went up the thing. John is from our North America business here, but we are in the process of evaluating. Obviously, as an organization, we will look at something that's gone well somewhere. We will look at implementing it other places, but that decision has not yet been made on that one, and it's 55% of our total 22 billion pound business. So we need to make sure it works successfully. Personally, I think it will, but we just need to go through that process for us. It was, from my understanding, it was done in the cloud. It was part of the migration process that we went through. I think there was a bit of a risk-averse approach adopted by a Japanese unit because at that point of time, Oracle was not certified to operate in AWS. SAP on Oracle was not certified to run on AWS. So even though AWS said, if you have a problem, we can move it to bare metal, you can do some tests around it, we decided at that point of time to actually do the database migration project. As you would have noticed in the case of CAMIA, we decided we don't need to do it, let's just move as is. And if and when the problem comes, I'm sure we'll be able to find a way to address it. Question? No, I think it's what we are using is, the question was more around what have we tested our regional approach? Yes, as part of our DR test that we do, if I take the instance, for example, the India instance, it's hosted in Singapore with a backup in Tokyo. The Tokyo, for Japanese instance for us is hosted in Tokyo with a backup in Singapore, and we have tested it. What we do is we do the data replication between the two regions. And we have got cloud function templates to be able to automatically bring up the servers. So our RTO requirements are a day. We can actually bring it up in less than that by just spinning up those servers automatically. With limited manual intervention, and you're up and running. Yes. Yes. Yeah, so basically what we did was we have actually created the automation so that we don't have to recreate the servers. It's all automated. So the data is already copied, and we just execute the scripts, and we're up and running. Yes? How did we do? We're just using the native SAP backup. Can we? Well, again, being a global organization, multiple environments, I would not say we have one size fits all model. So in the UK, we are using a backup solution, which might be slightly different than which we use in Japan or somewhere else. We are looking at standardizing it to whatever extent possible. But I think cloud provides us an opportunity to move towards common standards, common solutions, but it's a bit of a journey where you have to go through. and you have to take the team along. So to that extent, to some of these things, we say, okay, you want to use Tivoli in the short term, okay, use it, but wherever they don't have a solution, then we will, from a cloud COE perspective, mandate that they use a certain solution, and over a period of time, then move everybody to the same solution. Well, we are doing some consolidation. As I said, we are building a new European SAP instance for us. That requires a significant amount of business transformation because typically most of these SAP instances have been following the processes of that particular country. And now we are trying to say, okay, how do we homogenize the processes first from a business perspective, and then build out a new application that will support them. So we've done that, you could say, on a small scale. We built out, between Chile and Argentina, we built one instance, which could be for Latin America. We're now starting to build a platform for Asia. India is the first country which has gone in. As the new countries we will add, they will move on to the same platform. In Europe, we are starting a new project which will build that platform. Today, we have a few SAP instances in Europe, but they are different instances, and we'll gravitate towards one.
Your technical teams, I imagine that's spread out to probably almost unique per region, I would imagine. Are you using those same teams and retraining them how to use portal and manage those EC2 instances, or are you bringing partners?
It's a combination of both. We have countries where we have got large IT teams. North America is a good example. UK is a good example where they have a large IT team. In other places, we have a very lean IT organization. So what we have done within Compass is we've also created a cloud center of excellence team based in India. Rajiv is leading that for me, based in India, where we have created a sort of core excellence where we can define some sort of standards. We work very closely with AWS in terms of validating what we are setting out as the standards from security, compliance, and from an architecture perspective makes sense. And then we hand it to the countries to utilize. On top of it, we, as I mentioned in my previous slide, we use partners. I think too many partners. We tried to find one partner who could work across the different countries, but unfortunately, we were not able to make much headway there. It was more keen that we get the countries over, so we use local partners. So in Brazil, we may have used a Daedalus to do the activity. In UK, we used Lemongrass, and somewhere else we use Dell. So we have used different partners to supplement it from a perspective of project. But I think BAU activity, again, it's a combination, either doing it ourselves or using a partner to deliver some of those services.
Have you noticed any real differences, the number of outages and the duration of the outages?
Touch wood. In fact, I would say the user experience has been better on AWS, which is a bit surprising. If I take the instance of, for example, a Camia instance, the SAP was hosted in Dubai with a data center provider in Dubai. And we moved that instance from Dubai to Frankfurt. So for Abu Dhabi, it's a lot of latency. SAP, good news is it's not so latency sensitive. But having said that, the performance of the application is, from a user perspective, seems to be better having moved to the cloud. On top of it, I think what I noticed was the storage that we required on-premise compared to what it is on AWS is less. I don't know, it's some sort of compression technique that AWS is using. We have been able to compress the total storage that is required on the AWS environment. Have we had any outages till now? Touch wood? No, it's been fairly stable. And you know, it's going well. That's why we are going down this journey. Will we never have an outage? I can never say that. I think, is that environment more secure, more resilient compared to what our on-premise would be? Absolutely. I'm convinced about it because the level of resilience that AWS is able to build into their environment compared to what we would have on-premise, I think it's significantly better. And at least in the last 2.5 years that we have been running our workloads in AWS, again, touch wood, has been good for us. or it's a combination. Again, we don't have one. In some cases, it's through VPN. In other cases, it's through normal connection. We use authentication, etc., to access it. As I said, one of the big things that we had was we don't have a global backbone network. So for us, we couldn't connect each country into a traditional data center. Moving to AWS provides us that opportunity. In some cases, where the data traffic that we have, because in some cases, let's take the UK, the data warehouse is still on-premise. So there's a lot of to and fro from a data perspective. So we have a direct connection from our data center into their environment. In some other cases, we don't have a direct connect. And guess what? The application still runs. People don't face too many issues around it. It really depends on how you have architected. If there's so much of data to and fro, what we have tried to do was, if you're moving SAP, we try to move some of the other systems along with it so that it's on the same environment, so there's less latency and less traffic to transfer. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll give you some extra minutes back. One question, yes?
What's next?
What's next? Well, as I said, we will continue to do lift and shift of our existing workloads. We are looking at developing new applications. The new SAP instance that we will have will go straight into the cloud. We have started building the development environment. We will build the production straight there, and we will start to migrate the countries in. But where we have still got the instances running on-premise, we will migrate them to the cloud. The key difference, I guess, is really the pace at which we want to move. For us, it's more about trying to find the right appropriate time to move from each country perspective. Because to some extent, as I say, it really depends. If there's a refresh cycle happening, then we would utilize it to do it. If there's a data center contract renewal happening, then we would time it with that. So it's a bit tactical, but having said that, I think that's the way to really deliver the best ROI, rather than take an instance where we have invested just 1 year back with on-premise hardware, and suddenly we say we're going to move it to the cloud and have a write-off from a cost perspective. So we are ahead in our journey, but having said that, there's a lot more that we need to do to really get to a situation where we are truly in a cloud first, and from cloud first, a cloud-only strategy. That would probably be the next thing, but we are not yet there, so I cannot say we should be on a cloud-only strategy. Today, it's still about convincing each of the countries that they need to move from on-premise to the cloud. And more successes we have internally, more and more the other countries will also start to move down this journey. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming down.